Now, for more on this, I'm joined by MEP leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. So there are reports that the Eurozone may delay the Greek bailout until after elections in April. How much do you think Athens will be able to survive until then without some cash injection?
Well, I mean, the big day comes up in March when there is a major repayment, and I guess this new stance taken by the EU today is they'll make sure there's enough money to fulfill those short-term demands, but rather than committing to the whole package, what the EU is now doing, it's trying to influence the outcome of the Greek general election. Not satisfied with getting rid of the last democratically elected Prime Minister and putting in a puppet in the form of Mr. Papademos, it's now saying to the Greek people, unless you vote for the right parties, unless you vote for parties that are happy to be subjugated to EU control, we will not give you the rest of the money and you will go bankrupt. And this is the kind of blackmailing game that we're now seeing from the European Union. Is it any wonder, in the face of that, that much of Athens caught fire on Sunday night? So the reality here is that Greece, the country of Greece and its people, are to be put to the sword, sacrificed, if you like, at the European altar, all in the name of preserving the European project. And this is a project that these politicians have been working on for over half a century, and they don't, even though it's failing, they don't want to let it go. Well, I think the point about Greece is that this is the second bailout, of course, that we're talking about, but she only constitutes 3% in terms of size of the Eurozone economy. If we get to Italy, we get to one of the biggest countries in the Eurozone and in the European Union, and I don't think then we can print or invent enough money to bail out Italy. Italy is where this will all end. We've witnessed the beginning of a dishonest and downright dangerous German presidency. To revive the EU constitution, but to do it in such a way that you want to avoid referendums in the key member states is not just an insult to the French and the Dutch, but it's actually a classic example of the new phenomenon that I see all around me this morning, EU nationalism, where you never ever take no for an answer. But perhaps there's one small ray of hope from your speech this morning, Mrs. Merkel, because you talked about freedom at great length. And I agree with you, it is important. And so I ask you, will you please allow the peoples of Europe to have the freedom to determine their own futures in free and fair referendums and not to have this constitution foisted upon them? If you fail to do this, if you go on ignoring the peoples of Europe, you will breed and create the very intolerance, extremism and racism that you say yourself you wish to stop. For goodness sake, let the people speak.
Now, on behalf of the Independence and Democracy Group, Nigel Farage, 3 minutes.
Minister, you received some criticism this afternoon for your comment, British jobs for British workers, but you can brush that aside, because from the moment you said it, I don't think anybody seriously thought that you would ever, as a British Prime Minister, put the interests of British workers above that of your European dream. And my goodness me, you showed that this afternoon. It's just a pity that apart from UKIP, virtually nobody seems to have bothered to turn up to listen to you. No, you're very popular here. You're very popular indeed, because within a few days of the Irish saying no to the Lisbon Treaty, you had rammed that treaty through the British Parliament, and you've done it breaking a specific... You see, I said you were popular. You did it breaking a specific manifesto pledge that you would give the British people a referendum on the constitutional treaty. Shame on you, Prime Minister, for doing that. You have devalued democracy in our country. You have devalued the trust that voters have got in you as a British Prime Minister. But of course we know the reason why. The reason why is that we would have voted no. You said in your speech that none but those on the extremes oppose European Union. Well, that may be right amongst professional career politicians, but a clear majority of the British people want us to have friendship and free trade with the European Union, but do not want to be members of this political union. You cannot continue against public opinion to build this European Union. If you do it against the will of the people, you are storing up enormous social and political problems for the future. Please, please, let the peoples of Europe decide their destiny. Don't have it done in parliaments like this and parliaments like Westminster. It won't work. And as far as the economy is concerned, you've told us that somehow you're the economic guru. You're the man that can save the world. Well, I remember very well your first big act as Chancellor when you sold 400 metric tons of gold on the world's exchanges at $275 an ounce. At today's valuation, that would be $10 billion higher. But it isn't just the fact you got it wrong, because we can all get it wrong. It was the fact that you announced in advance how much you were going to sell and on what day you were going to sell it. It was an error so basic that the average A-level economics student, even in these educationally devalued times, wouldn't have done. To add to that, you've destroyed our private pension system. You took away from the Bank of England its ability to regulate the banks and gave it to the tick-box bureaucrats at the FSA in Canary Wharf. And we haven't heard an apology. Your government has apologised for the Amritsar massacre. You've apologised for slavery. You've apologised for virtually everything. Will you please apologise for what you did as British Chancellor, and then perhaps we might just listen to you? Thank you. Rosso, I enjoyed your view of the world today, but it was perhaps rather more ironic than you'd intended. You talked about the events in Egypt and elsewhere, saying, isn't it wonderful that people are rising up seeking democracy? I would remind you that democracy is a method whereby you vote for people who govern you, and then if you don't like what they do, you can get rid of them, turf them out and put somebody else in. But it was ironic because then your next sentence was, and that is why in Europe, facing the euro crisis, we must reinforce the community method. Now, for the public watching in on this, which increasingly they do, the community method means that laws are proposed in secret by unelected bureaucrats, people like you. Oh yes, I know, the European Parliament voted for you, but you were the only candidate that was offered to us. You know, that isn't democracy. So you're saying on the one hand democracy is good, but on the other, in Europe we can't have it, and that was reinforced. Mr Verhofstadt, who comes from Belgium, who thinks all nation states should be abolished, well perhaps his own will be very shortly, is saying we want an economic union. Nobody has voted for it. Nobody has been asked whether they want it. You may vote for it, but the peoples of Europe have not voted for it. Now what you should be discussing at your summit on Friday is Portugal, because after the bailouts in Greece and Ireland, it's pretty obvious the markets are sending you all a message. Come in, number 3, your time is up. Portuguese bond yields on Monday hit 7.6%. You know that yourself. It was only at 7%, of course, when it got there that Ireland had to be bailed out. We've also got, in April, a massive rollover of Portuguese debt, another 20 billion that has to be rolled over. Remind ourselves, in the last 6 months, 80% of Portuguese debt was brought up, purchased by the European Central Bank. We cannot go on, as a European Union, buying our own debt. If we do, the next debt crisis won't be a country, but it will be a debt crisis of the European Central Bank itself. You're quite right. Belgium was a British invention and a British mistake. We've made many over the years. We've got some things right and some things wrong, just as your country, Germany. Germany's history has not been whiter than white. I think you might agree. We think that when it comes to the economy, it really is time for some straight talking. Frankly, we're skint.
And UKIP's Nigel Farage, who escaped serious injury in a plane crash yesterday.
Am I strong enough to take on a job which is 7 days a week, where you have to work hours that you simply couldn't believe? It is becoming increasingly irrelevant who gets the keys to the door to number 10, because whilst they have the position, in reality they don't have the power. We've given that away. And that is something that people are waking up to and are understanding, and it's why we will fight and fight and fight in local elections, in general elections, until the British people are given a free and a fair referendum so that they can decide their own future. Mr. President, the reason for the anger and the noise is because we're not actually applying the rules of this place evenly. Mr. Schulz has repeatedly thrown insults, not just at me, but at many members of this House. He said that the Eurosceptics, the no voters, open the door to fascism. We've had Danny Cohn-Bendit calling us mentally ill. Can we, Mr. President, if the rules are that something is deemed to be an insult, a member is asked to leave, that's fair enough. But the anger, and I share that anger, is these rules are not applied evenly. Mr Schulz regularly calls other people fascists, and when he's called one, the member in question is asked to leave. That isn't right, that isn't fair.
The position to which you have just elected me is a new one, and I shall take office on the 1st of January 2010. The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet. It's the global management of our planet. It's the global management of our planet.